Good afternoon, everyone. We are researchers from WPI, just like the previous groups that have come up on the stage, and we are studying the Venice Entry Fee and the perceptions of impacts of such a fee on tourism here in Venice. So I'm Alex,
I'm Mark.
I'm Tim.
And I'm Samir.
and let's get started. So this clicker is great. So this graph may look a little familiar from a previous group, but essentially, the main trend behind our research is that tourism has been growing in Venice, essentially nonstop since at least the early 2000s. The main dip here is COVID-19, because no one could travel during a global pandemic. So stays are this orange line, so they're a subset of tourists. You can see that they've been growing essentially nonstop since 2003, with the big break being COVID, because no one could travel during COVID. So obviously the blue line's residents, and a later group will deal with residency here. But essentially, zooming in on this point in 2022, you can see that during tourist season, which is spring here and autumn here, essentially on any given day, tourists outnumber residents. So essentially that means Venetians are clamoring to reduce tourists because on the streets, any given person is probably a tourist. So Venetians are fed up with foreigners. They'll graffiti their monuments, Rialto's always shoulder to shoulder. They don't like their tourists. So what policies has Venice implemented to curb tourism? Venetians are clamoring to reduce tourism, so Venice has to do something. So the first thing we studied was the overnight tax, then we studied a hotel moratorium, Airbnb restrictions, and finally the Venice Entry Fee, which is the focus of our project. So the overnight tax was implemented in 2011, and basically it's a fee added to the total lodging cost when you book an accommodation, say an Airbnb, a hotel, any place you stay in Venice, you have to pay a fee. This fee is $350 per person per night, up to 5 nights, and essentially, if you're staying in Venice, you gotta pay it, and there are no exceptions, few exceptions. So the next thing is a moratorium on hotels implemented in 2017. What is this moratorium? Basically, in the historical center, so not this island, like places around San Marco, you cannot convert buildings into hotels anymore. It's not allowed. The reason for that is because Venice is trying to combat buildings turning into, or essentially businesses turning into tourist accommodations. The previous group has shown that. So essentially, the caveat here is that this island that we're on and other minor outlying islands are not included. So basically, tourism and the overnight stays will gradually go out over time to the outlying islands because newer hotels, if they continue to be built, are going to be on the outlying islands, not in the historical center. So if you regulate hotels, you have to regulate Airbnb restriction, or you have to regulate their main competitors, which are Airbnbs. So in 2019, the Greater Italy implemented basically legislation that enforced Airbnbs need to be registered and clearly display an ID. Here in Venice, this ID is known as the CIR, and it might even be displayed on your Airbnb itself outside on a plaque. Basically, this is just a disincentive to prevent landlords from getting into the game because they have to go through the whole process of registering their building. And a new restriction is that in Venice, the sewer system is quite old and is antiquated, which means that new Airbnbs are required to have septic tanks to mitigate the load that these buildings will have on the sewer system. Now, the reason why this is a key point is because doing this, installing septic tanks into buildings, tens of thousands of euros. This is a huge disincentive. So essentially, this is a moratorium on Airbnbs. That's how it acts. So finally, the crux of our research, the 2024 entry fee trial launch. 29 days, red circles here. Basically, you have to register to get into the city, except for Venetian natives like our lovely Fabio. Essentially, if you have to register if you're any of these groups, and if you're not any of these groups, overnighters, residents, students, workers, etc., you have to pay €5 to get into the city on weekends and holidays from 8:30 to 16. For the Americans in the crowd, that's 4 p.m. So why did Venice implement an entry fee like this? Hand it off to Mark.
Well, there are 3 main reasons for this, and I'm going to go through them really quick. First is deter excursionists, quantify tourists, and collect funds. And I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail. Firstly, Venice wants to deter excursionists from weekends. Venice wants to stop overcrowding on peak weekends, and as you can see on our graph, the dark brown is the weekends, and the goal for Venice is to make this graph as flat as possible to spread out tourists throughout the whole entire week. On any given day, there are 60,000 to 90,000 day trippers, and that takes a huge toll on the Venice's economy and its infrastructure. And they also want to encourage visits longer than one day. If someone stays in a hotel or in an Airbnb, they're spending a lot more money in Venice, and it goes towards their economy and also possibly preserving the infrastructure. So the city of Venice wants to quantify who's coming in. They do that by gathering daily data on city users, as is shown on the Community di Venezia website, where every day the tax is in effect, they post numbers of how many people were in. And it also helps city officials understand and control the visitors, that's where Enjoy Respect Venezia comes into play. And they also can track the volume and flow of tourists, where we have a sample here that we took from the Community di Venezia website, where we're able to make a comparative analysis with our own data, and so can they. And lastly, they want to collect funds for tourist mitigation. So for right now, up to date, they've collected 1.7 million euros, and their goal is to recover the money spent rolling out the fee, which was close to 3 million euros. And that money is going to fund preservation for the historical infrastructure.
So what did we find during our project? Well, let's see. We approached around 200 people, and of those 200 people, we interviewed about 119 of them using a survey that we curated. Here is an outline in general of our survey with different sections. The first section is the characterization section, where we basically tracked the location of our surveys and the age range of our interviewees. You can see here that most of our surveys were held in San Marcos Square, but we also did it in other locations such as the Rialto, Academia, and Campo Santo Stefano. And then in terms of the interviewees' ages, we had a wide range of people from 18 to 25, all the way up to 50 to 59, and 70 plus. In the next section of the survey, we have the classification section. Here we tracked day tripper versus overnighter types, and also the types of day trippers. You can see the breakdown between day trippers and overnighters. We had about 52 day trippers and 67 overnighters that we surveyed. Within day trippers, we had our own subcategories based off a 2012 Venice Visit Survey. In those categories, we had proper day trippers, basically people who come from home, visit the historical city of Venice, and then go back home on the same day. Improper are basically people who come to Venice but stay in the region, not in the actual city of Venice itself. And then indirect are people who basically stop maybe on their holiday, maybe they come from Rome into Venice for the day and then go to Milan after that. And then opportunistic day trippers are basically people who take the opportunity, basically if they're in the region for work or some other thing and they want to visit Venice. Next section is the overnighter section, where basically we tracked how many days did overnighters stay, and what kind of accommodation did they stay in, and how did they pay the overnight tax. Here you can see the amount of days overnighters stayed. It tended to be between 2 to 4 days mainly, mostly 3 days. And they mainly stayed in hotels, but a sizable amount did stay in Airbnbs. And in terms of being aware of the overnight tax, even though all of them were in accommodation, only 51, most of them did know about the overnight tax, but 11 of them did not know about the overnight tax. And then in terms of how they paid the overnight tax, you can see most of them paid in check-in, most likely due to paying their hotel fees or in their bookings. And you can see the breakdown is that included, like those hotel bookings were in those, but separate charges are for like Airbnbs if they had to be collected separately for the city. And then the next section is the day tripper section, where basically we track how did day trippers arrive in Venice, what attractions did they visit, and with whom did they travel with. Here you can see most people traveled by train and bus, but a sizable amount did travel in through boat. And here you can see the attractions people visited. Most were in San Marcos Square, mainly because we did most of our surveys in San Marcos Square. But a decent amount did just walk around the city. Most of the attractions they saw were from wandering the city, enjoying the city, and just traveling. And then in terms of the group types, they were evenly distributed, mostly through our survey. Most people were friends with their family, in like a tourist group, or with their partner. And then the next section is the entry fee section.
And so next we're going to be looking into some of the statistics from both day trippers and overnighters on specifically the entry fee. And so some of the questions that we asked were if they were aware of the entry fee, if they had paid the entry fee, is the information regarding the fee difficult to find, as well as their overall opinions and other questions. So to go into those now, over a quarter of the participants that we interviewed were unaware of the entry fee, as 32 out of 119 did not have any idea of what we were talking about. And to go into the split between overnighters and day trippers, overnighters were better informed than the day trippers themselves, even though it was a day tripper fee. So overnighters, only 1 out of every 5 overnighter was unaware. However, 1 out of every 3 day trippers was unaware of the day tripper entry fee. And that can be somewhat attributed to the overnighters learning about the entry fee through their accommodation and online while making their bookings. Additionally, even though only a quarter of our participants said that they didn't know about the fee, around half of our total participants said that the information regarding the fee was at least a little bit difficult to find. And we also wanted to take a note of where they initially found out about the fee, in which the majority was online, and there was a decent quantity that found out from us, as well as from somebody else, from news, or from the transportation. Again, splitting this into the overnighter and day tripper. Overnighters were much more likely to find out online, like I had been talking about previously, through their bookings or some other online method, while day trippers were more likely to find out in person. And we also wanted to find out whether or not €5 was a reasonable price for this entry fee, to which most people responded that it was reasonable. 79 out of our 119 participants said that the €5 entry fee was a reasonable price. There was some on either end, but most people said it was reasonable. And we also wanted to get their opinions on crowding. And so again, a bunch of people said that it was kind of neutral, to be expected. However, there was a little bit of our participants that said that the crowding had a slightly negative effect. And the final question that we asked all of our tourists was that if they were in favor of the entry fee. And to our surprise, most of our participants were in favor of an entry fee. And over half of our participants were in favor, and only 23 out of the 119 participants that we asked had a negative view on the entry fee. However, there is the important minority of the people who thought that it was a very bad idea. And so now we are going to look at the opinions of this day tripper from Milan who thought that the entry fee was a scam. The sound isn't working. Is it? I don't think it's me. It's. How do we got it?
I know it's a little bit of a scam, to be honest, in my opinion, because it's just $5 per person that enters the city. But you know, not everyone is paying this tax. You know, just they honestly, the police just see if you're speaking English. If you're a tourist, they're just going to charge you. Yeah. And I don't think that's cool, to be honest, because if you charge some people, you gotta charge. It's everyone or nobody, in my opinion.
And so to move on from there, we also want to differentiate the overnighters and day trippers' opinions on the entry fee. So what we found was that overnighters generally had stronger opinions than day trippers. So the overnighters had a similar layout that most of them were either indifferent or in favor of the fee. However, we had a lot more people that were very strongly against the entry fee or strongly for the entry fee. Looking at the numbers, 44% of the overnighters had a strong opinion, either positive or negative, while only 31% of day trippers had a strong opinion. And very importantly, of the day trippers that we interviewed, 25% of them had not paid the entry fee. 1 out of every 4 day trippers that was supposed to be paying the entry fee was not. And this is indicative of the communication for the day trippers not being quite where it needs to be, because every single one of those day trippers that did not pay had no idea what the entry fee was. There was nobody that we found that was doing it out of malice. It was solely ignorance. And so to go through some of the conclusions from our survey, 96 out of 119 of our tourists were either neutral or in favor of an entry fee. And 79 participants thought that the €5 entry fee was a reasonable price. And finally, interviewees stressed that the revenue needed to go to the right cause. And additionally, they also shared the sentiment that €5 would not be a sufficient deterrent. And with that,
So the question we're trying to figure out here is, has the entry fee been successful? Well, let's go back to the first part of our presentation and look at our goals. We'll start with collecting funds for tourist mitigation. Well, we would argue that the fee is on target to pay for itself. Up to today, they made 1.7 million euros over only 21 days. And we project that the entry fee will make 2.4 million by the end of the trial. Though they will not recover the 3 million euro that it took to roll out the fee, we believe with an extended period of time, this fee can be an absolute success. So has the entry fee been successful in collecting funds for tourist mitigation? Absolutely. Next, we're going to take a look at deterring excursionists from weekends. Out of 52 interviewees that arrived on a weekday, none of them came on a weekday to avoid the fee. And this has been a common occurrence throughout our surveys and through our video interviews, as this woman can tell you right here.
The reason they say that they did it, it's because they don't want a lot of people just coming for the day.
Yeah.
But €5, it's nothing. I
Yeah.
mean, if they charge €100, yes. But €5, I don't think it makes a difference. It may help the city, to preserve the city, but I don't think it's for just to keep people away. €5, it's not enough.
All right, so will we say that the entry fee has been successful in deterring excursions from weekends? It has not. We have absolutely, perfectly zero proof of that. So lastly, we want to take a look at quantifying who comes to Venice. Venice has been publishing detailed data about tourists, as you saw in the beginning. Every single day that the tax is in effect on the Community Venezia website, they post all their numbers of, for example, how many paying people they had, how many overnighters, and in total, how many people were exempt from this tax. And thanks to the registration enforced by the entry fee, we also know numbers such as how many day trippers came in, how many overnighters came in, and using this, the Venice Control Room is able to make accurate assumptions of tourist flow and able to track tourists throughout the city and make informed decisions through that. So the entry fee has been successful in quantifying who comes to Venice. Lastly, we have recommended moving the fee off of Sundays because Friday has a consistently higher turnout than Sundays, and Fridays and Saturdays have the highest count of tourists overall. And lastly, based on gathered registration data, we think that making the fee use dynamic pricing is a better way to deter tourists. If people see that on peak weekends the price is rising, they're much less likely to come. Thank you for listening, and if you want a more detailed analysis, you can check our website, and does anyone have any questions?